Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am excited about my conversation today with Katee Van Horn. She is a former VP of Engagement and Inclusion for a Fortune 500 company, and she now leads VH Included Consulting and Coaching, where she uses her 20 plus years of experience to partner with organizations to strengthen their inclusive cultures. She is an HR strategist and an international keynote speaker focused on diversity and inclusion. Her focus is on showing organizations how to build a diverse team where everybody succeeds. Welcome to the show today, Katee.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I am really looking forward to this dialogue on diversity and inclusion. This is a very hot topic.
Yes.
So we will definitely get to that. But before we do, we always like to learn the story behind our entrepreneurs. So take us back. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? And take us along your career path.
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Ohio. And then my family moved to Arizona when I was about 9-10 years old and have been in Arizona pretty much since. I did have a little stint in Las Vegas for a while and a stint in Minneapolis, Minnesota for a while, and then remembered that I like the sunshine and not snow. So Arizona it is. And went to school at University of Phoenix and have really focused on HR throughout my career. So, I started in kind of customer service, started working at a high school actually, and was working for one of the vice principals and kind of changed that into, hey, let's go do recruiting for a while, and moved to recruiting, worked a recruiting desk for years and loved it. Loved, being able to help people and find people jobs. It was just, such a rewarding career. And then I parlayed that into more of a generalist role and really focused on how to work with organizations and make organizations better for the employees and make the employee experience better. So, my career has really been about the employee and how do you make sure that you have fair and consistent processes and things like that, which kind of informs where I am today.
Absolutely. And I just a few stops along your career path here. Mm-hmm. You spent looks like almost 7 years working for Godaddy. Talk about that experience a bit.
It was awesome. I absolutely loved working for Godaddy and had the pleasure of, working with all of the executives when we were going through a time of major change. And so, I started when the founder was still leading the organization and helped through changing from a, single person owned company into a different environment. And then obviously we went public, all of these different things. So really was able to make my mark there by helping to figure out just some of those processes that you move from, when you have a startup where things are just kind of ad hoc and we created this thing on our own or on an Excel spreadsheet, to having the systems and tools and processes in place to make sure that it was a great experience for the employees and make sure that, we were doing the right thing and making sure we had just a great system and HR function that was really supportive and strategic.
Yeah. What was the number kind of head count from start to finish when you started there and then when you left?
I think it was around less than 2,000 when I started. And when I left there, I think it was around 4. This is now going back a few years, so I'm forgetting.
Yeah, that's okay.
5,000.
So you doubled. You over doubled in that period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's big growth in that period
Absolutely.
of time. Did you find So when you left GoDaddy at the end of 2017, you were vice president of global engagement and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
What was the culture like at GoDaddy? I asked this, a little baiting, if you will, because it's a technology company, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, really. And so we know not all the technology companies in the US are, particularly good at, hiring women, for example,
Right,
at certain
right.
levels. So what was the culture like there? And obviously that was part of your role is bringing that inclusion into the company.
Absolutely. So, I think for folks that know the GoDaddy brand, they know about the, Super Bowl commercials that started the company off. And that, from a female perspective, it wasn't, the best thing. And, there were definitely some challenges there because the external brand, when I started with the organization was wasn't great.
Mhm.
And so, the marketing team did a phenomenal job of turning that around and really focusing on matching that, what we had going on internally with the culture, matching that to, how we were showing up publicly. And it was great because we had such a change in how we were perceived externally, which also really helped us from an internal perspective to drive a more inclusive culture. When
Mm.
I started, we did have quite a number of female executives, and yet when we would go out to recruiting events and talk to females, talk to women of color, it wasn't a place that was attractive to them, that they were like, oh yeah, I definitely want to go there. But yet, as we started to evolve the commercials and really start talking not about, whose shirt is going to fall off during a commercial, instead talking about our products and, what we were actually doing. It was amazing that the shift, to women technologists who were like, I want to work there because I know I'm going to learn things, I'm going to be able to build things, and I'll be able to have an impact. Because we're still a smaller organization, you could really, from day to day have an impact on what was going on with the products and services for our customers, which was huge. And so that was just such a great selling point for us. But it was real. And it was something that, anyone could walk into the CEO's office and make a suggestion. And that wasn't just, talk, it was true. And so it was great. It was just a great place to work. And again, I think, having those processes in place that when you think about, some of the challenges that tech companies are having are around promoting women, promoting people of color, and being able to change some of those things so it wasn't just the squeaky wheel that was getting the promotion, but the right person who had the experience, who had the knowledge to be able to move forward in their career and be promoted. Changing some of those things really helped to drive home this inclusive culture.
Mm. It's I'm glad you brought up the Danica Patrick thing because I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm like, all right, she's going for it. So
yeah, it's okay. It is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, that was a real. I remember at that time, I was a business owner myself, had a website, had hosting.
Right.
I had been a GoDaddy customer, and honestly, I boycotted the company at that point and haven't looked back. Unfortunately. So that, it's again, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that perception out there was significant.
Right. And if you think about small businesses, I think that the last statistic I saw, it's been some time since I last looked, but pretty much half of small businesses are owned by women. And so it didn't make sense to have these commercials that were like these salacious commercials because you're the prime example. Yeah, I'm not going to use your products because this is not who I want representing who I am.
Yeah.
So, being able to shift that and really, again, focus on the products and what we were doing it was a great story, and it was, a great thing to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So at some point around 2017, you made a decision to lean out and go your own direction. Talk about what that was like and what that process was like.
Absolutely. So, when we did start to make the changes at GoDaddy, I was having a lot of conversations with different organizations and different people in organizations. And we kept coming back to this, wow, it would be great if you could come do that at our company. Wow, it would be great if you could help us with this, that, or the other thing. And so it was one of those, when that little bird on your shoulder just keeps chirping, you got to pay attention to it. And So it was one of those things where, okay, what is my next move? And it was the time. It was the right time to go out on my own and try something new. And the scariest thing probably I've ever done in my entire life. But it was one of those things where you got to follow your heart. You got to follow, when it seems like the right thing to do. And so I decided to open my own consulting agency, and was extremely, blessed right off the bat, because I was connected to some great organizations that have been able to help them. Here Technology is a great example, where I've been working with them now for over 2 years, and really helping them to change the dynamics of the things that, you mentioned earlier. How do you have, how are the women leaders showing up, and do you have women in leadership? How do you have a global view of diversity and inclusion? And so working with different organizations, big and small, you're able to see what the different challenges are with the different organizations. And the way that I talk about it, and the way that my business partner talks about it, is, you have those small tweaks that you make that seem kind of not like a big deal. But then when you start to see it grow and become something even bigger and truly make a change to the culture, that's huge. One of the pieces that we focus on is like upstander, training, which is basically, going from a bystander who just sits and, sees things happening and doesn't really take any action, to upstanders, where we're asking folks to be a part of the culture and to own the culture and to say what they don't want in their culture. So being able to be those advocates and allies has been huge. And I've seen it time and time again in the different organizations that we're working with, that people feel great when they're able to say, yeah, we don't do that here, or that's not what we want for our culture, or yeah, we want a lot more of the good stuff. And, what are the things that we can do and promote that really drive that inclusive environment?
That's so interesting, Katee. Thank you for mentioning that, because, when we look at the stats of, and I'm sure you've seen them a million times, and I won't get them exactly correct, so I'm going to ballpark it, but, how many employees are engaged versus, actively disengaged, those numbers are pretty staggering, right? We see a big percentage of employees report being actively disengaged at work. And what you're talking about is really, one of, I would think, a very important piece of this puzzle of standing up, being part of it, not just like heads down, hey, I'm doing my thing on the side, shouldn't be bothered by that, but really empowering employees to build their own culture.
Right. And I think that's so key to having an inclusive environment, but also to retaining your employees. So, that engagement piece is so key. If you feel ownership of the organization and feel like I'm driving this culture and I own this culture as an employee, that's huge. I mean, and it's kind of a basic, business principle where, it's if you give people stock in an organization, or if you tell them act like an owner, you can have those different changes in their mentality of how they're thinking about the organization. And the same thing applies to culture. If you say your culture is yours, whatever it's not something that the CEO dictates or that HR dictates. It's each individual coming to work every day and how they show up with their peers, how they show up for the work that they're doing, how they innovate, all of these different pieces. That's the culture. It's not something that, you write on, with your values on a wall somewhere. It's what is it really like to work there? So yeah, it's huge to be able to really engage folks from that perspective.
Yeah, I have struggled with this word culture for so long. And I'll be asked this question in, a panel event or an interview here and there of, what's your company culture? How do you create culture? And I have no answer for that, to be honest. It's so nebulous. I'm like, how do you define culture? What does that mean? There's almost, I struggle with, defining leadership too, frankly, because these concepts are so big and so complex, and then I read about all these companies who, have really blown it. I mean, they've failed as a company, not because they weren't profitable or didn't make great products, but they just had terrible cultures. Where do you even begin when you walk into a company that's struggling with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're spot on. And it's like, it's the same thing as diversity and inclusion, where people are like, oh, you do that. Like, what does that mean? And I'm like, all the things. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, seriously.
So, so, when I think about culture, when it start with an organization, it's listening. And I think that's key. And I don't know who said it, many, many years ago, like Jack Welch or some other, business mind said that, the culture is dictated by your least engaged employee, or by the person that's, acting the least appropriately, I guess is, another way to put that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very true, because it's what you allow in your culture is what will define it. And so, I'll use GoDaddy as a great example, where we had a bunch of executives that came in from other tech companies. And part of building the culture that we wanted was sitting down with them and having the conversation of, what did you like about your former company? What didn't you like? And so, what will you allow in and what will you not allow in? And being really thoughtful about that. And I think that's, with every organization, I sit down with the executives and ask them to just talk about, what is a day in the life? What is it like to work here? What are the things that you truly value about working here? And, asking frontline employees, asking mid-level managers, and asking executives, you might get very different answers at each one of those levels. Hopefully not, but sometimes you do. And so being able to kind of put all of that together to say, what is it truly like? And and then being able to define that by, here's what the culture is. And you might have subsets of cultures on, in different offices, and you might have subsets of cultures on different teams. So it's all driven by the people that are involved in the conversation and involved in defining it, really by their actions.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So much to unpack there. So thank you for that, though. It's helpful. Just to, it's something I need to keep in mind. I need to keep front of mind consistently as we grow as a business. And, like many companies that have more than one location and are expanding, it's a tricky business, frankly. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about, of course, the thing that everybody's talking about, diversity and inclusion. And one thing, I'm sure several folks have said this, but I watched, I think it was a TED Talk recently, something similar to that, if not, where a gentleman was talking about, we need to go beyond diversity and inclusion and get to what he called belonging. What's your thought on that statement? And let's dive in maybe with some examples of diversity and inclusion programs that you've focused on recently.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about BH Included Consulting and Coaching. So my organization, what we talk about is inclusion, diversity, and belonging. There's a lot of diversity and inclusion consultants who are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We really feel like inclusion, diversity, and belonging are the key tenets of what we're trying to drive. And it's exactly that. So we start with inclusion, because here's the thing. We could go for diversity first and say, okay, we're going to hire 10 amazing African-American women. But if we bring them into a culture where it isn't inclusive, they don't have opportunities, they don't have a career path, they aren't listened to, they leave. Just, very simply. And so then you're back to square one.
Yeah.
So you have to lead with inclusion, and you have to really focus on how do we make an inclusive culture, which goes hand in hand with that belonging piece. So it's, the inclusion is, hey, you're hired, you're listened to, you feel like you have a career path, all those things. Belonging is, having a friend at work, or understanding, what are we driving and what am I contributing as an employee? Do I actually understand why we're here? And do I feel like I belong here, at the organization? Because I think that's the piece that a lot of times is missing is, you'll have an inclusive environment, but that belonging piece, and my business partner talks about this all the time, that the belonging piece is kind of on both sides of the table. So you can have an inclusive environment. The belonging piece is owned by the employee though too. What are they bringing to the table, and how are they, showing their authentic selves appropriately for a work environment? And that's where belonging kind of comes into place. It's not just, hey, we built this thing, come work here, but how do people actually contribute to, here's who I am, and this is how I'm contributing to the culture, to the bottom line, to the innovation of what we're trying to build, those types of things.
Yeah. Wow. So much there. So Yeah, I mean, it is, you touched on this for a second. You mentioned this friend piece of it. And I
Mm-hmm.
have read some similar and, you know, sort of research on this, and it's logic, but I think it's something that's so overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
I actually lost one of my best employees, frankly, and I have a tiny company. It's not like I have hundreds of employees. And because she felt lonely at
Mm-hmm.
work. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Hera Hub, it's a
Yes.
female co-working space, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, how can you be lonely here? There's like
Right.
all these awesome women, doing really amazing things. But she didn't have a buddy, basically.
Right.
She didn't have a
Mm-hmm.
friend, and therefore she felt lonely and disconnected and ended up ultimately moving on because of that. And I reflect on that and I'm like, that was such a simple thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
simple in one way, but difficult in another. Like, how do I find her a buddy? I
Right.
mean, I'm not.
No, absolutely. And also, what is the obligation of the employer to do that? Like,
Yeah.
it's also that piece. So that's where the employee ownership comes into play too, of how are they putting, are they showing up for lunches? Are they showing up for different activities in the office so that they can say, yes, I'm a part of this? And,
Mm,
the having a friend at work is such a key lever to engagement and to retention as well, because
hmm.
it is one of those things that, this is a horrible thing to say, but, you need that person that you can go gossip with over
Yeah.
coffee or over a beer after work or whatever it might be. And, go, hey, here are all the horrible things going on, but then also here are the great things. And here's why we're here. And so you kind of need that person that you can vent to or use as a sounding board, and that understands, because when you go home at night, your significant other doesn't understand all the dynamics of who you work with and all those things. So you need someone that you can talk to at work, which is,
Hmm.
it's just so key. So,
Yeah.
that's a huge piece to it. And, it's definitely something that, Hera Hub is a great example, because I truly believe, from a belonging perspective, you have built this amazing thing. And, in Phoenix, Shaza has done a phenomenal job of building this amazing thing where women can come and work and have a great experience. But if you're not putting back into that environment and that culture to say, here's what I'm going to offer, or here's how I'm going to show up,
Hmm.
then then you aren't going to get what you need out of it.
Yeah. It is interesting because different parts of the country, even here in the US, have different cultures of, giving back. And we have tried to make that, I guess that's the tricky part of running a co-working space, is you not only have the culture of your core team and your employees, but then you have the culture of the members too, right? And their
Mm-hmm.
businesses. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you blend all those things together and really from day one set the tone that this is a place not only to receive, not only a place to work, but also to give.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that message comes through and sometimes it doesn't. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's also, like you're saying, different parts of the country. That's so true. I mean, I have worked with companies, and I know you're in California, so I'm not
yeah,
picking on you, I promise. But I
that's
mean,
fine.
the environment where, because the traffic is what it is, people want to get out of the office, at 2 o'clock, because they know if they don't get on the road by then, they're stuck in the office until 7,
Yeah.
or, you have a situation where, yeah, on the weekends, I don't want to drive into an event or a volunteer activity. And so you do have to adjust for those kind of microcultures within different offices to make sure you are serving and providing what people want. And I think that's where, the listening and the asking comes into play, which, again, I know is such a huge piece of what you're doing with the Hera Hub culture, is just saying, what would be beneficial? What would help? How can we be of service? But then, that piece of, yeah, how are you going to give back, and what can
Mhm.
you offer to our members as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to touch on something that was spurred by what you just said, Katee, which
Mm-hmm.
is giving back in an employee realm. So in regards to volunteering, things of that nature, it is something that we have done as a team here at Hera Hub, but not enough, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing kind of best practices with some companies in regards to, engaging their employees to volunteer and give back to the community? And what are maybe some of the outcomes you've seen from that?
Absolutely. So I think it really is, again, I'm going to say the same thing I just said, of it's listening to the employees, because you
Hmm.
could have amazing volunteer activities that you're like, wow, I'm so excited about this. But if it doesn't resonate with the employees, then it's going to miss the mark.
Mm.
So, it's a situation where, okay, hey, you have a bunch of animal lovers in your office. Okay, so go volunteer at the Humane Society, or, something, make blankets for the Humane Society or whatever. But if you have folks that are, that, hey, we're really focused on the LGBT community. Okay, well, how can we show up? Or we're really focused on women in leadership. So are there mentoring opportunities that you can do? So I think it's really asking for, what's important to the people that are going to be doing the volunteerism. Like what does resonate? What is important to them and impactful to them? Because if you don't have that, then it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great advice. Well, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit more about your business and maybe some of the things you're working on now, some of the things that you're excited about for 2020.
Absolutely. So yeah, we are full steam ahead. I think this week kind of kicked us off that it was like, oh wow, it's January of 2020. Yeah, we need to get going. So holidays are over. Now we're in the running. So I think for us, the biggest piece is really because I was working as, I was a solopreneur. I've now brought on a business partner. A lot of the stuff that I was doing was somewhat ad hoc for the clients that I had. And so now trying to really productize what are we offering and making sure it makes sense, but it's also some of it being able to kind of rinse and repeat. That's one of the pieces. And that was something that, my business partner, Lisa, has been amazing at really helping me to kind of put things on paper of, how do we do this the right way? But I think the other piece that we're really focused on is technology. So, knowing that, there are so many different products that are launching out there for HR teams, what makes sense, what is really helpful, what is not helpful, and, AI being such a big conversation right now, what's going on in that AI space in regards to like the bias that might creep in and some of those things. That's what we're trying to help organizations with as well. But then technology as well, thinking about how do we make some of these trainings offerings that can be done on demand and remotely and all of those things, because that's something that when we have global organizations that we're working with, and even, just in the United States, we have people on teams that are remote or that, only come to the office one time a year, or whatever it might be. So how do we make sure that, when we have these trainings, when they have these different offerings, they're truly available to everyone? Because it's so important, again, to drive that culture that everyone's speaking the same language and understanding here's how we do things and here's how we don't do things. So even thinking about, as we're onboarding employees, what does that look like? And how do you set the tone from day one around inclusion, diversity, and belonging of this is who we are as an organization? That's so key. And so trying to build some technology around that and make sure it's right for our audience.
That sounds like a big task. Exciting stuff, creating systems.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, Katee, if our listeners want to reach out, get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So they can find me at vhincluded.com. That's my website. Or on LinkedIn, I'm Katee Van Horn. And that's Katee with 2 E's. So that's always a challenge, but thank my mom for that. But yeah, so those are 2 of the ways that you can find me. Or, I'm on Twitter and Insta as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Katee.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.